Comms. Oh. Ollie, are we back? 31 seconds. Will.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the kind of people?
I think the big advantage of working for an organization like Microsoft is that always someone there.
Thanks. Are we good? We're good. Big round of applause for Martin. Thank you so much. Can I steal the slide clicker off you, sir? Thank you very much. No problem at all. Great little unit. Fantastic. So folks, next up, we have Steve from Ping, who'll be talking about digital identity in Australia. There is your clicker, sir.
Thank you. Ooh, which button do I press?
That's the one.
There we go. All right, really nice to be here again this year. Great to see everyone in the audience. I am going to be talking about digital identity in Australia, and specifically it's a beginner's guide. There's a lot of identity experience in the audience, hundreds of years probably. So to be clear, I'm the beginner in this picture, not you guys. I've been doing identity for about 6 years now, 4 of which is at Ping. In that time, I've been around the edges of national digital identity a little bit, but it's not something I've ever really had the chance to sink my teeth into. And so I thought I'd use today as a bit of an excuse to do that and actually really get in deep on this subject and really share this from my perspective. This is a photo of me at the end of my research. Identity in Australia is very complicated. There's lots of different systems that are interacting, and that's really what I wanted to get into through this process, is to unpick that a little bit, understand where we're at and where we're headed. So let's untangle it together. The first thing I was able to find resembling a digital identity scheme within Australia was actually in 2006. So this is an initiative called AUSkey. AUSkey was a setup that was intended to allow businesses to log into AUSkey, the Australian Business Register, and the ATO. And it was largely based on certificate-based security. So for anyone who has worked with certificates on unmanaged devices knows how much fun that can be. I can only imagine what that was like. I'm going to do a little bit of audience participation today. I'm going to take the coward's way out, unlike Sue. We're just going to stick with shows of hands. Can I get a show of hands from the room? Who here has had to install Java in order to use a web app before? More than I thought. That's great. I'm not the oldest person in the room. So you can probably see where this is going. I was digging through some of the old documentation on this, and I found this little gem. This is something I haven't had to think about for at least a decade. This is the troubleshooting guide for AUSkey, and basically telling people how to go in and configure Java on their machine. So just a little reminder for me, we've come a long way since those days. Things are a lot easier, which is great. This was decommissioned in 2020 and has been replaced by newer systems in the meantime. Next up, and by the way, we're going to do this in a bit of a timeline. So next up is 2009, and we have the Digital Verification Service, which is run by the Attorney General's Department, the DVS. DVS is a very good thing. It's a great way of helping to mitigate identity fraud. Little hiccup recently. So in 2018, the DVS looked to expand the scope of the services they offer, and they're looking to do facial verification services. In order to do this, the government needed to pass some legislation to support that and give it a legal framework. That legislation didn't end up getting passed. It got struck down by the Parliament. There were lots of concerns around the privacy safeguards in there, and specifically the safeguards around one-to-many matching. So if you think about the Born Identity movies where they get the photo of the suspect and they scan the stadium and find him and pinpoint him, that's the sort of thing that they had concerns about, and the privacy implications, the police state considerations around that. Now, I can't tell exactly what happened from there. It seems a little bit like the government kind of just forgot about it, and they never passed legislation, and the DVS started offering the facial verification services anyway without that legal framework. That was picked up in October last year, and the current government was able to rush through some legislation, and they got that patched up in December. So that was an interesting little chapter in that. Moving on to 2012, we have the eHealth record, which is now known as the MyHealth record. So this provides storage of medical records like x-rays, pathology reports, and makes them readily accessible by medical practitioners. It was originally opt-in, so when they launched it in 2012, it was opt-in. Around about 2018, the federal government saw that there was very low adoption of this system, and so they made a decision to make it opt-out. And there was a drop-dead date in 2018 where if you hadn't opted out, you were going to be opted in. That was a very controversial decision at the time. Lots of social media activity, lots of mainstream media activity. People were very uncomfortable with the idea of having their medical records stored in a central government database and the potential there for being breached or being misused. So they pushed that back. Now, another one I'm going to ask is, who here opted in or opted out of that scheme? A few people. And sorry, that was a bad way to ask the question. Who opted in when it started? We've got a few. Okay, not many. I didn't know it existed, and I think that was true for a lot of Australians. And then who opted out? Yeah, me too. All right. Is there anything else to say on this one? That's right, we were going to talk about the price tag on this. So as of 2020, the price tag for this project was just shy of $2 billion. As of right now, they are undergoing a modernization, which is costing $429 million. So the price tag for this is sitting around $2.5 billion, thereabouts. So not a cheap project by any stretch of the imagination. To their credit, though, the adoption of this service is quite good these days. So they're currently sitting at 23 million user records with data in them, which represents about 85% of the population. And as far as I know, there haven't been any breaches to date. So that's nice too. Moving into 2019, and I want to talk about the Trusted Digital Identity Framework, or TDIF. So this is an accreditation framework for digital ID services. It's intended to encompass both public and private entities. However, to date, private participation in the scheme has been pretty minimal. Reality is that the primary use cases for this are still MyGov and MyGov ID. They've had some issues along the way. There's been some outages. The App Store ratings aren't great. But for the most part, it has been chugging along, albeit in that very limited scope of some specific government services like Medicare. So we're going to talk about the consumer data right now. So I'll talk a little bit more about this one because this is one of the ones that I actually have some personal exposure to. The CDR, for anyone who's not familiar with it, is based on the UK open banking standards. So this is really a way to empower users to share their financial data and to do so in a way that's secure. So there's two main use cases for this. The first is better analytics. Even today, there are apps out there that will help you understand where you're spending your money, where you can save money, where you can do better financially. Like I said, even now, a lot of these apps will basically ask you for your username and your password for your internet banking, which is terrible for a whole bunch of reasons. They effectively log in, they screen scrape, and theoretically there would be nothing to stop them from accessing accounts you don't want them to have access to, changing personal details, making transactions. So with the CDR, we have a way to do that via an API programmatically. You can grant your consent. They can read the records, only what you consent to, and importantly, you can revoke that consent at any time. So that's one use case. The other use case is really around competition. So looking to drive stronger competition within the market because people have better access to information that's more comparable. The best example of this that I've seen is the Westpac 10-minute mortgage. So if anyone who's applied for a home loan knows that it can be a real pain. One of the main things you have to do is go through and tell the bank about all your expenses, what your income is, and that can be quite a process. Westpac actually used the CDR to automate that. So you would issue a grant, let them access your primary account, and they would automatically go through and see what your outgoings and your incomings are. And they were able to automate the approval of loans on that basis. And so that's the 10-minute bit. I don't know how it's going now, but they wrote $80 million of loans just in the first month. Okay. There have been problems with the CDR, and this is something that not a lot of people see. This is something I see because I'm close to it. Personally, I think it's technically overcomplicated. The CDR standard is based on the UK standards. However, what they've done is they've gone in and made just enough changes to make it really tough to implement. And so for anyone who had to implement it, particularly the big four banks who were first up, that was a really expensive and time-consuming process. And then also my final show of hands for the day, who here has actually used the CDR? 2 people. And that's the other problem, is adoption. There hasn't been a whole lot of adoption of the CDR. And I think that's, well, I was talking to one bank about this. They obviously spend a lot of money coming into compliance. Only about 0.1% of their customers have actually opted into the CDR. So this is, went to banking first. It's rolled out to the energy sector and is active now there. They were going to roll it out to telco, super, and insurance, and there are people in the room who might know more about that than me. They've chosen not to do that at this point in time. There's going to be a strategic review in the back half of this year where they take a look at the system and really decide what's next before they start to push it out to more industries. So that's it for the tech and the platforms. Just some more macro considerations here that I think have been quite formative. Obviously, we had a global pandemic not that long ago. That accelerated digital adoption for sure. But I think more importantly, it really highlighted the criticality of digital identity and digital interactions in the modern economy. So that's formative. And then we also had the identity breaches of 22 and 23. So for me, that brought identity security into the spotlight, into the public spotlight in a way that really hasn't been done before. And I think that has been a significant driver for change, as we'll see. So this might be a slightly unfair picture. I do think that the system is overly complicated and probably needs a bit of work. I've only really even hit the big ticket items, excuse me. I haven't covered things like the DTA's digital services platform, AusPost Digital ID, the New South Wales Digital Driver's Licence, and all of the various state-based initiatives like Tell Us Once. So I don't just want to stand up on stage and complain. I do want to dig into where some of the things are that we could do better. And so I think the first challenge that we've hit is definitely around public trust, which was really clearly evidenced in that My Health use case that I mentioned. The government's track record in IT is a little bit patchy. For anyone who remembers the 2016 census fail, that was kind of comical. We have the MyGov outages around tax time in 2019, and then I've also got the robo-debt schmozzle last year or the year before. But I think the other thing to note here is that it is a very difficult job for the government to take on. And one of the things my CEO, Andre, says that I really like is that trust is won in inches and lost in miles. And when you look at the breadth of services that the Australian government has to offer, the likelihood that something is going to go wrong somewhere in there, it's effectively inevitable. And so when that happens, you're inevitably going to lose that trust, and that's a really difficult challenge for the government to overcome. But that does lead into my next point on public-private cohesion. So this is something that I think has been a little bit lacking. With TDIF, the intention is absolutely to have private enterprise as part of that scheme. Hasn't happened yet, not in a meaningful way, I don't think. And then also with the CDR, even though there was lots and lots of business consultation, I don't think it was as productive as it could have been, and didn't ultimately deliver the outcomes. Let me just try and get this sorted. Is that better? Cool. Still, this does all offer an opportunity. So there was a survey conducted by Thales at the start of this year where they surveyed people and asked them who they trust to hold their PII. And banking came in at the top of the pile. It wasn't an amazing number, only 44% of people trust the banks with their PII, but that was still better than any other industry. For anyone who is wondering what the lowest was, it was unsurprisingly social media. So I do think this can be a good thing if we are able to drive that private inclusion within the TDF. It's going to give users more choice in terms of how they share their data, how they verify themselves within the ecosystem. And so using trusted entities like the banks, I think is going to be part of that. From a purely selfish point of view of the government, I think it's also a positive for them in that it takes some of the pressure off of them as well. Good security, you're putting your eggs across multiple baskets, you're not putting them all in one central store. And then, from a very cynical point of view, it means that the government's not on the hook for every single little thing that goes wrong. I don't want to overstate the last one, but I do think there is a little bit of an element of some ideas happening before their time. If we look at the AUSkey example, that technology was pretty janky. And then I didn't talk about it too much, but we've got the digital driver's license as well. So that was pretty successful, and I think that's almost the exception that proves the rule. It proved the appetite for something like that within the populace. They managed to front run some of the standards and some of the more global adoption, and they made it a success anyway. And that's something that's quite impressive given that the tech at the time was still fledgling. So moving forward, I'm going to switch gears and look at recent and upcoming developments. So the 2024 Digital Identity Bill, I'm sure lots of people have been monitoring that in the room, passed the Senate the other day, and I think it's going to go through to the House again and should be passed pretty soon. This bill does come off the back of those 2022 breaches. It does a bunch of things. It's really looking to try and drive additional participation from the private enterprise, importantly from the state and territory government departments, and then also improving some of the safeguards in place. One of the things I liked about this is that there was also a lot of industry consultation leading into the legislation as well, which is good. In November last year, the ABA announced the Scam Safe Accord. So this is the ABA is of course the community association of the banking sector. They've committed to collaborating on prevention of scams by sharing information between the banks. Ian Sorbello is going to be talking about this later, so I'm going to let him deep dive on that one. We have Connect ID. So Connect ID is part of Australian Payments Plus. For anyone who doesn't know AB Plus, they're a newly formed organisation. What has happened there is that a bunch of different payment providers have come together under one banner. So FPOS, BPay, the new payments platform, are all part of AP Plus, and Connect ID is another one of their arms. So Connect ID aims to make it easy to verify who you are using organisations you already trust. So going back to that banking stat that I gave you, they're able to bring banking into the TDF or TDIF. So for example, if you want to buy a bottle of whiskey on Dan Murphy's, you need to prove that you're 18. Rather than uploading your driver's license to Dan Murphy's and hoping they don't get breached, you can use your existing eKYC process with NAB CBA to prove that you're over 18, and they can really just store that assertion effectively that you're over 18. They don't need to store PII. 9 out of 10 unemployed Aboriginal people in Australia don't have access to their digital identity online, which is a major problem when you're in that scenario and you're looking to get into the workforce. This is a real challenge. WUNA was built to help First Nations people, including those who are digitally excluded or living in underserved communities. Functionally, WUNA operates in the same space as Connect ID, but they have some capabilities that are really tailored to that use case. So they have the ability to have, for example, an elder assert that someone is who they say they are, that they have Aboriginality. It's able to operate in environments where shared devices are really common, which is something that happens a lot in those underserved communities. So I'm sure you can imagine the security model of having a device that's shared among 10, 20 people is very different to something like we're used to, where you have your device and that's yours. And they also have physical fallbacks. So if you're in a situation where you don't have a phone, you don't have internet, there is a physical card they have that will allow you to prove some things about yourself. The functionality is not as great, but it can be helpful. So this is a great initiative. One is going to be offered as a verification option by Connect ID, which brings them under the TDIF standard as well, which is also a really positive thing. Just going to pause while someone takes a photo. So look, I think that's a really great note to finish on. It has been a really bumpy road up to this point. Anyone who works in security knows that, and someone mentioned it earlier, but getting things done in security is really hard until there's an incident, at which point people materialize, budgeting materializes. And so the silver lining of the breaches that happened in 22 is really coming to the forth now. So I'm really excited about what's coming down the line. I do think the future is bright for us, and really want to thank you all for your time.
Round of applause for Steve Dillon. Thank you, folks. Out of time for questions, Steve, but spot on, right on the dot,
Yeah.
man.
I'm the beginner, I don't